I am shocked, I am.
Really? Oh my gosh.
Ralph Headley is a local artist of quite some repute, and I'm not surprised to see it here, but I am delighted to see such a magnificent work. Tell me about your connection with this picture.
Well, I'm Ralph Headley's great-grandson. I didn't inherit it, I bought it for about £50 in 1971.
Of course, he is well known for his working class subjects, as it were.
Yes.
And here is a scene that you would have seen all over Britain.
Yes.
Because they made bricks on the spot in all sorts of places. But I can't think of many paintings of brickmaking.
Yes.
Do you know about brickmaking?
Well, I do, because I have, because I have this painting. It tells me about brickmaking.
Well, it does really, doesn't it?
Yes, yes.
And I'll tell you why I like this picture immensely. Because the composition tells the story.
Yes.
It's all about composition. Where do you start? In a way, well, of course, you start in most pictures in the foreground. And where does it lead your eye? It leads your eye down here to this anonymous heap. What is that heap? Of course, that is the clay. And that clay has actually been sitting there probably for a year. And then it leads you back down the wheelbarrow track. And where does the clay go? It goes into this machine. So as you say, I haven't done a quick course in brickmaking as well with this picture. And then they fill out the bricks, and it seems to me that they squeeze out the water and it comes down this channel. And then she's placing the bricks here. That's what good composition is about. It leads your eye around the picture. And there is no question that this composition is a very dynamic composition. Not just because your eye is led around the picture, but when you come to this figure, in the foreground, the main figure of the girl placing the bricks from the molds just to dry out on the earth, she is echoed by the man with the wheelbarrow. So then you see the dynamics of the two working people, each with a different task. Now, the interesting thing is, was that in the family? This is the sketch for the painting?
No, a London gallery inquired about this picture of the Laying Art Gallery in Newcastle.
Right.
And they
led directly to
me, and I couldn't refuse to buy it.
No. Well, I think it's very interesting because here is the artist working out his thoughts in a sketch.
Yes.
And it doesn't really work. And we can see here that instead of having a dynamic here, it's rather flat and one-planed. And the wall doesn't lead to the clay, and he hasn't got it right. He's working out his thoughts. It's very interesting. You should bring the two, because this is what art is all about. Value. What did you say it cost you? I can't remember.
£50.
£50, 1971.
1971, yeah.
Not bad. I think a fair value is £35,000–40,000.
That would.
Has this picture been in your family for a long time?
Yes, it has, over 100 years. It came down to my brother from a maternal grandfather, and we think it's one that he bought in Holland. An old man in Holland was bedridden, and he had a lovely collection of pictures, and he had a new picture put at the end of his bed every day to look at. But when he became very old, he decided to sell the collection. And my grandfather and another friend went over and bought up the entire collection and divided it between them. And we think this is probably one of those, because Dutch pictures at the time were out of fashion, and he got them very reasonably. And so we think all the Dutch pictures came from him.
Really? Well, it is a lovely picture, and as we can see here from the label, Herman Swaneveld, it is indeed by him. Labels can very often be misleading, but in this case, this picture is absolutely genuine. This can be backed up by this charming little monogram here, which is quite difficult to see, but which is H and then an intertwining V and S, which is typical for Swaneveld. But besides that, it is very typical of the artist's work. He was, I don't know whether you know, but he was a Dutch painter of the 17th century, born around 1600. He was a pupil of Claude Lorraine, and like a lot of Dutch painters of that era, the Golden Age, he came to Rome and painted there. A lot of painters from Holland did exactly the same thing. And they were a lot of them were very influenced by Claude Lorraine, who was an immensely influential landscape painter. And as a result, a lot of these Dutch paintings have a very Italian look about them, Regarding the quality of the picture, I think it's variable, but on the whole very nice. I think this figure here is particularly well painted, whereas perhaps other areas of the painting are not quite so good. So perhaps some of the cattle here are a little bit weak, and the rendering of the water is perhaps not quite as good as it might be. Well, I think a picture in this sort of condition, which is rather dirty and has obviously been in a private collection for a long time, could well be worth in excess of £15,000 today. And possibly more.
As far back as I can remember, it's hung on the wall of each one of the homes that I've lived in.
And you adore it?
Oh, I love it, yes. Just the vibrancy of the colour, and I'm very much an outdoor person, so it's the type of homestead I'd love to live in myself.
So it belonged to your parents, did it?
It belonged to my parents, yes. My father was an artist, a Yorkshireman, quite an avid traveller with his paint box, and I was given to understand that he actually met Fred Hall.
Fred Hall died in 1948, I think. So.
Oh, well, then he was well within my father's lifetime.
So your father probably painted with him, maybe?
Maybe. That I can't qualify.
Because this is really, you know, the thing about a picture like this is it's a real artist painting.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a painting that, as you say, breathes light colour, and it's somebody who's really thought about it. Because the interesting thing about Fred Hall is that as a young man in Newlyn, he was a bit sort of heavy-handed and pedantic.
Yes.
But he was a great experimenter with paint. He loved to push paint around to see what it would do for him.
Right.
And so, unlike a lot of artists who flower in youth and get pedantic and boring later on,
yes.
Fred Hall was the opposite. He was always pushing paint around, and he got better and better.
Yes.
And so this is a later painting by him, but it's full of the joy of painting.
Yes, you'd call it springtime, wouldn't you? The freshness in the greens are the spring greens, aren't they? Yes, and I love the way he's captured the sunlight on the hedge on this side and the roof and the wall.
I suppose it's in the spirit of the times. I think people like space and air today, not the claustrophobia of Victorian England.
No,
they like exactly the opposite. And so this sort of painting is very much in our spirit today.
Yes.
And so because it's a popular painting, I think it would do very well today.
Really?
Well, I would say probably around sort of £8,000 to £12,000.
Really? Oh my.
When I come to a roadshow, I think it's particularly dangerous to try and anticipate what one might find. And I suppose coming to Oldham and this particular part of the country, one must think, well, possibly a work by LS Lowry might turn up. But I must say, when this popped out, I mean, I couldn't have been more surprised and delighted, because as far as I'm concerned, it's absolutely right. Having said that, of course, we must go to the museum, the Lowry Museum, and have it checked out. But all my instincts and the way that it looks makes me feel that it's absolutely spot on and beautiful. What's the story?
I brought it in for a friend of mine, an elderly gentleman, about 79 years of age. They did belong to his wife, who's passed away. She used to chauffeur Lowry. He was very fond of having people chauffeuring about all over the country. And this is how they came into his possession.
Yes. To all intents and purposes, Lowry's style, these industrial buildings, the figures, the busy streets, are all rather similar, but I think from this particular period, and if I haven't been mistaken, the date is 1937, a good early period. I just love the colour and the busyness of the streets, and for my own taste, it is not too melancholic, it's not too brooding, it has a busyness and kind of optimistic air, which sometimes is not always apparent in his paintings. Thick paint, we call it impasto. You can see here that he's drawn right through the thickness of paint across these bits here. And particularly love that passage here, these figures in the distance, so they're pushed in and just touched with colour. And also one of the things about it is one can judge it quite carefully, because when they haven't been protected by glass, they get full of grime and dirt. And this has got glass on it, and it's kept the dirt off it. You can see right the way through, and just a little bit of a gentle clean will bring it up into an absolute gem. Now, before we turn to values, let's also look at these other things. Tell me about this little drawing here.
This is a cigarette packet.
Right. Now you can see that because here are the folds of it here going across there. Yes.
When this lady was chauffeuring Lowry, he was sat in the car and he started to sketch this. And then when he finished, he was about to throw it through the window. And she said, "Don't do that." And he said, "Well, I'll sign it for you if you want it. It might be of some value someday."
Really? What a lovely story.
Yeah.
So do you think he really was going to throw it out the window?
Yeah. He didn't realise his value of his paintings then.
No. And we've got a photograph here of the great man himself.
Yeah.
And what is so interesting is that, of course, if you could just hold that a second, of course, it shows the subject. This is the painting, and this is the drawing for this painting, but it's saying the same subject, which is a ferry, isn't it, in Scotland, isn't it?
Yes,
the Scottish subject. Yes. And again, this is the later date, September 1958. Now, of course, what we must do is kind of try and work out the value. Now, my word of caution is the attributions must be confirmed by the Lowry Museum. But these little bits and pieces, the cigarette packet, I don't know whether it's worth 1,000 or more, but it could well be. This drawing, number of £1,000. But I think what we're really all dying to kind of really try and know is, what's this worth? Does your friend have any idea of what he thinks it's worth?
No.
He's a shy man, is he?
Oh, yes. Very shy,
Well,
yes.
I think it's probably worth £100,000.
Gosh. Oh. Oh.
It now becomes a horrible problem, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
If I was being conservative, I suppose 60 to 80, but I think it is so fresh, so wonderful, has not been on the market. The prices have been quite extraordinary, and I wouldn't be surprised if it could fetch £100,000 or more.
It's never been off the wall.
I was sitting at the Dome right across the street from here, and I saw the queue and knew about that it was happening there. And when the queue eased up, Fran said, my wife said, why don't we have them look at that painting of ours that we have hanging in the house? And I said, good idea, and I left the coffee there, and I went down to the house. I live right around the corner here, and brought it up here. Now look at me, star time.
Well, thank heavens you did. Thank heavens you did, because what you've brought in is one of the most interesting and important things that I think I've seen ever on the show.
Really?
Down in the corner here, we've got this signature here, T. Fujita. And here we have the most important Japanese painter in a Western style of this century.
Wow.
How did he...
Glad I had that cup of coffee.
It's not still getting cold.
No.
But tell me, how did you come to have it in your...
My wife's father was in the rag trade, and he used to go to Paris for the shows.
From New York?
Yeah, from New York, yes. And he used to go to Paris for the fashion shows twice a year, and he always come back with a painting or something, some kind of memento of the visit. And he brought that back in the 20s, and my wife remembered it. Well, when she was 5 years old, it was hanging in their place.
That's really
there.
interesting that it should be the 20s, because I think I'm right in saying that Fujita first came to Paris just after the First World War. I mean, just
really,
literally at that time. He was a real pioneer. He was the first Japanese to move into this sort of very avant-garde painting circle. So the École de Paris. He was a friend of Modigliani, for instance. Oh. And you can see, I think, in this picture, the obvious Modigliani echoes.
Well, I know who Modigliani is, but I've never heard of him.
You can see the resemblance, anyway. And you can also perhaps see even a little bit of influence of Matisse in the very bold setting of the figures against a sort of matte background in this way. And there was Fujita painting in amongst the really big boys in the 1920s.
That's good news.
This actually is painted in, pen and ink drawing, plus a bit of body colour, and it's very, very fine.
Do I have to worry about insurance on it?
Well, I think, tell me, have you got it insured at the moment?
No.
I mean, have you got it sort of on
just
part of your general
on a policy?
On a general policy.
General policy, yeah.
Well, I suppose. How can I put it? I think you should probably insure it for £50,000.
Do you know who all these people are?
Yes, this is my great-great-grandfather and his family. This was painted about 1820. They lived in Leith, just outside Edinburgh.
It's a really amazing picture. I think it's so nice, very intimate.
But it is nice, and we're very fond of it, but the trouble is we've no idea who the artist was.
Ah, well there, I might be able to help you because it was exhibited in the Scottish National Gallery in 1956.
Yes.
At which point they attributed it to the son of a very well-known miniaturist.
Yes.
The son's name being Charles Robertson. It does seem to fit. The date is exactly right.
Yes.
Well, within a year of what you suggested.
Yes.
And also the idea of it being by a miniaturist explains quite a few things about this picture that intrigue you otherwise.
Yes.
For example, there's a sort of clumsiness in the perspective and the technical merit of the picture that makes you think that the artist wasn't used to painting such big pictures.
There is a school of thought that he painted one head and put it on all the bodies.
I think he would have had to stay with your family for quite some while before he'd finished this picture. It would have taken him, I feel, months. It's got that kind of meticulous attention to detail as well that a miniaturist painter might use. And one of our experts has identified this toast rack as the Robert and Cadman patent expanding toast rack, patented in 1807. Such is the detail that he can tell that.
Yeah.
All these figures are really well arranged. You've got this lovely kind of compositional circle going on of glances and looks. And the whole thing finished off by the father, who's got a look of slight dismay on his face, and I think it's
not surprised.
Not as much as her look of dismay.
Well, I think that's a look of resignation, isn't it?
Yes, it has to be. But anyway, I think he's actually looking across to one of his sons here, and he's saying, "Don't you bring that dead duck in here. There's dripping blood all over the carpet." But what I really like about this picture is the faces of each of the children. I think their character is all immediately identifiable. On the whole, a ravishing picture, a real cross-section of life as it must have been.
But artistically not.
Well,
it doesn't worry me. I mean, I like it. Yes,
technically perhaps it falls down in some ways, but it's so charming. It transcends all of that, I think.
Yes.
And to put a value on the picture, well, now that is difficult because, of course, the artist doesn't have really a good track record in the marketplace. Although we don't really mind who it's by, it's such a wonderful slice of life that it's got to command £15,000. I think it could even go up to £20,000 and perhaps more.
Goodness. But I wouldn't replace it.
You couldn't replace it.
Well, I couldn't replace it, no.
It's the most wonderful picture. Do you have any background information about this picture?
Well, all I know is a letter. So Mrs. Kay, way back in 1900, claimed that one of the ladies was her great-grandmother. And then about the 1920s, a Mr. Kay wrote from Calcutta, wanted to know what had happened to Mrs. Kay because he thought she had the original draft of this picture. But after that, it seems to have died, the history.
Yes. And so, therefore, we think it's of the Kay sisters, do we?
Yes. One was her great-grandma, and the other was had become a Mrs. Robinson.
Yes. And was there any indication at all of an artist at all?
Well, apparently at the time, it was claimed to be a Romney, but in this correspondence, that was denied, and it was said Mrs. Kay claimed that it was a Lawrence because the ancestors had the original drawing, which he was trying to trace.
Well, that's very interesting. You mention here two of the main British portrait painters of the 18th and 19th century, following on from Gainsborough and Reynolds. And in my opinion, I don't think it's by either of those two artists. And the reasons I would say, first of all, taking Romney, is that the brushwork is quite different in this painting from anything that Rumney ever did. He tended to use rather angular brush strokes, and this in no way has that sort of brushwork.
No.
Likewise, Lawrence, who was another very, very great painter, had very, very flashy brushwork, sort of sparkling, and this picture, in my opinion, again, is probably most likely by an artist called Sir William Beechey, who is a lesser-known artist, and in some ways perhaps a rather duller painter. He's a very rather conservative in his brushwork, and this picture, I think, if you look at the details of it, you can see the way the hands are painted, and it's perfectly competent, but it doesn't perhaps have the extra bit that artists like Rumney and Lawrence had. It's really, in my opinion, very typical of his work. And I would think in terms of date, we're looking at something executed probably at the turn of the century, around 1800, that sort of thing.
Yes.
It is really a very, very nice painting. I noticed one thing that perhaps bothers me a little bit on first inspection, and that is that this hand sticking out of here perhaps doesn't quite work. It's rather sort of curious the way it sort of peeps through there, but I don't think he's fully understood it. But other details, such as the face here and here, are really very nicely painted. Have you ever had any idea what it might be worth?
Well, I can't remember the last valuation, but at the time of my grandmother's death, which was before the last war, I think none of her pictures were valued at more than £5.
Yes,
but since then I've no idea.
Well, I think it's gone up a little bit since then. I would think that a picture like this, fully accepted as by Sir William Beechey, is probably going to be worth somewhere in the region of sort of 15, maybe as much as £20,000.
What is that?
Well, it's in very nice condition, which of course is very important, but also it's a very nice subject of two good-looking people. This is very important.
The whip has always been there.
Is it? Where's it been then, this much-loved picture?
I think it was in an old barn or a farm building for about 30 years. And then my father, he bought it about 20 years ago. I think it was a house sale for a few pounds. It wasn't expensive.
What did he think about it?
He liked it, but we didn't know how to get it restored.
Right.
So it just got left. I've always assumed it was Waterhouse.
Do you know about Waterhouse?
I've seen an Antiques Roadshow before, and there was a painting on there by the same artist, and that's why I bought this today.
Right, but this is so untypical, this picture, that first of all we say, well, it's not really a Waterhouse. But it is signed JWW down here. And if I think about Waterhouse when he started painting, he was sort of experimenting. He wasn't really very well trained when he started painting. He painted little interiors and this sort of thing. And I personally think this is by Waterhouse, John William Waterhouse, because I think it's the young man coming into being a better painter, and before he's really decided the subjects he really wants to do, which is his affinity to the Pre-Raphaelites and pretty girls. So, on balance, I'm going to say this is a genuine Waterhouse. And then we had to say, well, since you've looked after it so beautifully...
No, I'm not to blame for it.
Since you looked after it so beautifully, what's it worth? It's in rotten condition, but this can be put right, although I think that will be difficult to clean. This area I'm not worried about, but the dirt is quite ingrained into that impasto there. I think between £5,000 and £10,000. £5,000 or £6,000.
Shock. I am shocked, I am. I thought about £500. I was so worried about the whip.
Well, it's pretty nasty. That is horrid, you know, and that's needs a lot of work doing, and so does this. But I didn't see why, you know, finished and all done up, somebody might ask £20,000 for it or something.
So it's worth for me to take it and have it restored?
I think so, yes.
This is a very unexpected find for Hexham. Is it something you've had for some time?
Yes, I've had it quite a few years. It's been put away with its face to the wall because it wasn't a picture that we had a great deal of affection for, but nevertheless felt it might be of interest.
Yeah, so you turned it round and
Turned
brought it
round.
out and brought
Thought
it down
the road
this
show.
afternoon.
Yes.
Well, I'm very glad you did. It's absolutely fascinating. It's down here you can see the signature, Hofer. Now this is Karl Hofer, who was a German painter, actually dated 18, down here, 1918. Hofer was, as I say, a German, but really his training was entirely French and Parisian. He was in Paris, I think, from 1908 onwards, and was very much, first of all, influenced by Cézanne. As you can see, I think, a little bit by the whole technique in this picture, the approach to the different shapes and the investigations of the different angles. That is the Cézannesque element. And of course also the cubism of Picasso and Braque. He's very definitely taken on board a bit here. But the interesting thing about Hofer was that being a German, in 1914, when war broke out, he was not very popular in Paris and was actually thrown into a sort of detention camp for most of the war, and only re-emerged back in Berlin in 1918, I think I'm right in saying, when he painted this picture. So memories of France are still very strong in him. But I find it very exciting, his very bold use of paint here. It's very thick.
Put on with a knife?
That's right, put on with a palette knife. Very little, if at all, put on with a brush. All put on in this very thick, sort of creamy way with a palette knife. And as a result, what you have got here, through a certain, perhaps, lack of attention to the picture,
to say it has suffered somewhat.
you've got a lot of
away.
cracking in the paint. But I don't think that it's actually in any way not remediable. I think that it's perfectly possible, if it was well relined, this picture, to put it back into pretty good order. And, well, presumably, as a picture that was standing face into the wall, it was not something you had insured separately.
Absolutely right.
Well, I think you certainly should get it insured. I mean, probably for something in the region of £15,000 or £20,000.
Heavens.
So I think also you might turn it round face outwards too.